Good morning, students. This is Ms. Lewis. The second part of this week's assignment is to analyze the development of the theme of the poem, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. To begin today's lesson, we'll watch an interview of author David Orr discussing the two interpretations of The Road Not Taken. After the interview, I'll lead you through a discussion of some of his observations. The interview will begin on the next slide.
Arts correspondent Jeffrey Brown has that.
Two roads diverged in a yellowed wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler, long I stood. The first lines of one of the best-known American poems by one of the nation's best-loved poets, Robert Frost. It's called The Road Not Taken, and that's the title of a new book that calls it the poem everyone loves and almost everyone gets wrong. Author David Orr is poetry columnist for the New York Times Book Review and joins us now. Welcome to you. As you say, this is one of those rare poems that gets into mainstream culture, even commercials. Why? What has done that?
You know, I began the book by talking about a commercial in New Zealand, and it's a commercial for Ford cars. And the narration of the commercial is nothing but someone reading The Road Not Taken. They don't attribute it to Frost. They don't even tell you what it is. They just read the poem. The fact that you could recite a poem written by an American in New Zealand today, a 100-year-old poem, is pretty amazing, and that they're expected to recognize it, know what it is, have associations with it. I mean, it's an incredibly popular piece of writing.
That's from the famous lines in the last stanza, right? I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So it's read as a kind of pay-on to individualism.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why you see it in so many graduation speeches. That's why you see it in commercials. I mean, there's no company in the world that would put the poem up as part of their commercial if they knew what the poem is more likely to mean.
Which is what?
Well, if you look at the end of the poem, the speaker is claiming that he's going to be saying something about the future. He's saying, I shall be saying this with a sigh, some ages and ages hence. But it's easy to forget what happens in the middle of the poem. In the middle of the poem, it becomes very clear that the two roads that the speaker is confronting are actually the same, or at least interchangeable. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we should probably take a look at those lines just so people can understand what I'm talking about. In the middle of the poem, Frost writes, though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black.
In that sense, it doesn't matter which one you take.
It doesn't matter which one you take. And in fact, what Frost is suggesting is that when the speaker later claims that the road he took was less traveled and that it made all the difference, the speaker will just be making up a story after the fact to justify a choice that maybe wasn't even really a choice in the first place.
Frost himself wrote it for a friend?
That's right.
Almost as a kind of a jest or joke?
That's what he says. He claims that he wrote it because he used to go on walks with the English poet Edward Thomas, because Frost spent a brief time in England. It was actually the beginning of his career as a poet. And what he would like to say at readings afterward is that he and Thomas would go on these walks, and then Thomas, who was a somewhat more romantic sensibility than Frost, Thomas would always regret whatever path they had taken. Mm-hmm. And then afterward he would say, well, we really should have gone to the right. I could have shown you something over there. We should have gone to the left. I could show you something over there. And Frost was very amused by this, and so he wrote the poem as a kind of joke at his friend's expense.
You know, you're also writing in somewhat, you have to inevitably writing about Frost himself, right? Who is famously subject to the same kind of duality. Mm-hmm. The way he is seen as the avuncular, the farmer, the wise man. But as you write, and as biographers have shown, a sort of constructed self.
That's right. That's right. There is a duality to Frost. It's very much like the duality in this poem. And what I try to suggest in the book is that there's an element of truth to both of these images, just as there's sort of an element of truth to both of the common interpretations of The Road Not Taken.
Well, in fact, your larger story here is that the reading and the misreading both tell us something about ourselves,
right,
particularly as Americans.
Right.
And our ideas about individuality and community and so on.
That's right, because if you think about the sort of the setting of the poem, it is an individual making a choice between two options, which is a very very distilled version of the idea of choosing. I mean, often we're choosing among dozens of options, or we're making choices in groups. This is sort of the most focused version of choice that you could come up with. And, you know, in America, as a lot of psychologists and social psychologists have been demonstrating for some time now, we favor a kind of highly pronounced individualism that is maybe not quite so characteristic of some other countries.
All right, the book is The Road Not Taken. David Orr, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Recall during the interview, David Orr stated that Frost may not have intended the poem to be a celebration of individualism. The title suggests that the poem focuses on the paths people do not choose rather than the paths they do, hence the road not taken, which could point to a message about regret more than the popular theme of an individual choosing not to follow the crowd. However, as Orr said, the title could simply be indicative of Frost making fun of his friend for constantly fretting over the path they did not take during one of their woodland walks. Let's go with that assumption. The poem is about nothing more than Frost pointing out to English poet Edward Thomas that his second guessing was pointless because all the paths through the woods were basically the same. Lines 9 through 12 of the second and third stanza certainly point to this assumption. However, it is the interpretation of the last two lines of the poem that make it popular. The speaker took the roads less traveled, therefore he does not follow the crowd. He does his own thing, his own way. Thus the theme of individualism emerges, but only if you forget about lines 9 through 12 in the middle of the poem. Still, being one's own person, doing things one's own way is a valid theme, as Orr suggests, although probably not the overall theme. Let's begin our close reading with the blue callouts. The first stanza sets up the allegory for the entire poem. It establishes the surface story wherein the speaker is confronted with two roads going in opposite directions, of which he can only choose one. Symbolically, in the story underneath, the speaker is confronted with two choices of which he can only make one, as indicated in lines 2 and 3. The allegory is established by the symbolism of the two roads that represent a choice between two paths, while underneath, which symbolizes the unknown, reveals why the speaker chose the other road in lines 6 through 8. He thought it was the better claim, clearer than the path that bent into the undergrowth, because it was grassy and wanted wear. In other words, not many people had taken the path he decided to choose, which would have been a nod to individualism, except for the irony introduced in the second and third stanzas, wherein the speaker notes that the road he chose had been worn or traveled about the same as the one that he did not choose. So, if individualism were the theme of this poem, as the last two lines of the last stanza have been interpreted, then lines 9 and 10 contradict the idea of the speaker's choice being unique, different from that of others. Also, in lines 11 and 12 of the third stanza, Frost further establishes that the choices are not different, as both roads equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. If the roads were different, then what made the difference in the last line of the poem? Why use diction like the word sigh to suggest regret or resolve, and the phrase ages and ages hence to imply that in the future the speaker will regret his choice or celebrate it? It's not clear that the speaker made a good choice. It is only clear that his choice made the difference. The is a specific article which indicates that the difference applies to the speaker's life in general, as this revelation comes many years, ages, and ages after the choice was made. What emerges in the first stanza is that the speaker is confronted with a choice. What emerges between stanzas 2 and 3 is the idea that people are confronted with similar choices. So what's important, the choice or the choosing? The answer revealed in lines 13 through 15 of the third stanza is that the speaker made a choice and stuck with it. Ergo, way leads to way. I doubted I should ever come back to the road not taken. So what emerges is that a road only matters if you take it and stick with it, or a choice only matters if you make it and stick with it. This idea is supported by the speaker repeating the pronoun I in lines 18 and 19 of the final stanza. I took. Allegory, I chose. The one less traveled by. Then follows his choice with the declaration, and that made all the difference. As such, the last stanza clarifies what was introduced in the first three stanzas. It is not the road not taken that makes the difference in our lives or defines us as individuals, but it is that we took the one, or we chose a path. In other words, we are defined by the choices we make, not the ones we do not make. Herein lies the celebration of the individual. However, the poem is about our lives being defined by the choices we make. So the overall theme that emerges is we are defined by the choices we make, not the ones we do not make. So to that end, what Frost was really saying to his friend is that it is pointless to fret over choices that he did not make, because only the ones he did make have the power to impact his life. As such, the road not taken is of no consequence. Before you begin Thursday's assignment, make sure to review the slideshow again to get an understanding of how the theme was developed. The assignment is on Schoology. All assignments on Schoology are open until May 20th, so if your grade still isn't where you need it to be, you can complete any number of those assignments for extra credit to bring your grade up. And as always, if you need a different way to complete an assignment, send me an email at lewismiddleschool.ela@gmail.com or shoot me a text at 678-562-5889. So final report cards are coming out soon, so make sure you do as much work as you need to get your grade to where you want it to be. Good luck, guys.